Welcome back, everybody. Getting down to the wire here in the end of the school year. Just a few more topics to go, and I hope everybody's doing well and doing a good job with their online work and getting used to everything. Our next topic, well, kind of a continuation of a topic. Last week we spent time learning about how do we calculate the midpoint of a segment. Today what we're going to do is using that information and that same formula to apply it in a different problem solving setting here. So how do we use the midpoint, namely, to find a missing endpoint? So what we're spending time answering today, just to kind of show you what the question is visually, let's say that I know this is, think of a segment. This is one endpoint of the segment. Let's say this is the midpoint of the segment. How do I know, or how can I find what is that missing endpoint right there? So that is the question we're going to spend time answering today. So taking an endpoint and the midpoint of a segment, how can I figure out where does that segment end? Okay, so again, jot down the formula if you don't have it there in your notes from last time, along with this picture and the visual, and then what we're going to see here today. The way I like to teach this, these are very quick and easy questions to answer. I hope you'll find anyway. Even shorter than answering the midpoint questions themselves. So this is what the examples will look like. We're going to do a pair of them here. So find the missing endpoint. We'll start here on number 1 with this information that we know about a segment. I know that the first endpoint is 2, 7. And I know that the midpoint of this segment is 5, 5. And how do I use that information to figure out what is the second endpoint of this segment? Now, what I want to stress here at the beginning is the way that I teach this, and it's a very visual way. It is not visually accurate by any means. However, the visual, I think you'll find, really helps answer these questions. So here's what I always like to start with. Just get something on paper. Draw a line segment. Okay. We're going to call this endpoint number 1, which is 2, 7. We're going to call this the midpoint, which in this case is 5, 5. And then this is endpoint number 2, which we do not know yet. Okay, so how do I find out what those missing coordinates of this point are? Now, hopefully you can see why this is not an accurate visual representation, but it will be one that helps. If I were to plot these 2 points on a graph, they clearly are not going to make a horizontal line, but for our purposes, this is going to help see how to figure this out anyway. So what I'm going to stress is all you have to figure out is what is the difference in the x coordinates and what is the difference in the y coordinates. And then you just do that same difference to go from the midpoint to your second endpoint. So here's how you figure it out. Look at x number 1 and the midpoint x coordinate. If I look from 2 to 5, first of all, answer to yourself, is it increasing or decreasing? The answer to that is it's increasing. So that is a positive difference or positive change. So I'm going to emphasize that plus or minus there. So from 2 to 5 is a plus 3. Okay, now I do the same thing for the y's. From 7 to 5, I'm going down, I'm decreasing, so that is a negative difference, and to go from 7 to 5, you subtract 2. So here is now how I finish off this process. I do this same difference in plus and minus in this case. They could be 2 positives, 2 negatives. But now what I do is I take the midpoint, and to the x-coordinate, I just add 3 more. And to the y-coordinate, I just subtract 2 more. So, here's what I do then. For endpoint number 2, the x-coordinate is 5 plus 3, which is 8. For the y-coordinate, I do 5 minus 2, which is 3. It is that simple. Taking the difference in the x-coordinate of the midpoint and the first endpoint, doing the same with the y's. And now let's compare here. Let's check to make sure the midpoint is in the middle of these 2 points. Sure enough, look at the x-coordinate. Isn't 5 exactly halfway between 2 and 8? Secondly, isn't 5 exactly halfway between the y-coordinates of 7 and 3? So again, hopefully that's a pretty quick and easy visual for you to follow for that example. And this is the way I like to teach it. There's a couple of different ways to solve these problems, but I think this one makes the most visual sense, and I think it's fairly straightforward to think through once you do it. We're going to do one more here. Make sure we get the hang of this here, hopefully. So once again, let's start with our segment visual. So I know the first endpoint is -4, -1. We'll just have to be careful once we involve negatives here. So this is endpoint number 1. The midpoint is -9, 3. And the answer to the question, what is that second endpoint over there? Okay, so once again, I'm just going to figure out the differences between the x-coordinates and the y-coordinates and do that same thing to get to the other endpoint. Think I'm moving from first endpoint to midpoint, then doing that same thing to move from midpoint to the second endpoint. So here's all we do. Let's look at the x's. Now here's where you have to be very careful. To go from -4 to -9, a bigger negative number means that we subtract it. And from -4 to -9, that is a -5 difference. Okay, next, to go from -1, so now I'm looking at the y's, from -1 to +3, well that means we're adding because we went from negative to positive. And from -1 to 3, that is an increase of 4. So I have a +4 difference in my y-coordinates. And once again, to get the second endpoint, I just do exactly these two same things to the x and y coordinate of the midpoint to make that happen. So from -9, we subtract 5, which is -14. And now for the y coordinate, we go from 3 and a +4, so 3 plus another 4 would give us 7. And once again, there we have it. So that is how we use ideas with the midpoint in order to calculate a missing endpoint. So again, that'll pretty well wrap up everything we're going to do in this section. Please see me throughout the week with office hours or email me if you have any questions, and have a great day.